Hi, my name is Christine Sperduti. I'm a senior on-site health coach with UPMC, and I'm also working towards my doctorate in health science from CalU. My research focus is long-term weight maintenance interventions that are evidence-based, best practice, and realistic. I'd like to focus on the behavioral components of weight maintenance to align with my health coaching experience and interest. Our objectives over the next hour are to define grit and understand how it plays a role in our and our members' long term goals, identify and discuss 5 ways to grow grit, discuss the role of grit in health coaching and behavior change, and finally, to apply this new knowledge about grit to our health coaching practice. Before we got started, you should have completed the 12-question grit scale that was found in front of you. We'll go over that grit scale a little bit later. But firstly, think about somebody that you know who is extremely exceptional at something. Whether they're athletic, they're intelligent. You might describe them as talented, as a natural, but we often overlook the hard works that these individuals have put into things. As Americans, we have a bias to value talent. Because if success is due to talent, we don't have to feel as bad if we don't try our hardest or are not as successful as other individuals. While talent and IQ are important for success, they are not the only thing that matters. Grit also plays an important role in someone's success. Dr. Angela Duckworth is a Christopher H. Brown Distinguished Professor of Psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, whose entire research career revolves around the concept of grit. We'll dig into the exact definition of grit and some examples a little bit later, but for right now, let's watch a short video of Dr. Duckworth explaining this concept. Grit has been researched in many different areas and fields. However, grit has a little relationship to IQ, suggesting it's an independent trait. Grit has been researched in areas such as dropouts and admissions criteria at West Point, salesperson retention, individuals with graduate degrees, special ops forces withdrawal rates, college GPA, and National Spelling Bee contestants. You're probably thinking, this sounds great, but what exactly is grit and how is it defined? How do we measure it? Grit is the combination of passion and perseverance. Passion meaning long-term adherence to goals and consistency of interests as opposed to changing goals frequently. Perseverance refers to overcoming setbacks, working hard, and finishing things instead of giving up. Grit is measured through a 5-question or a 12-question grit scale that's been validated through research, which you all completed before we started. The maximum score on the scale is 5, which means you're extremely gritty. The lowest score on the scale is 1 for not at all gritty. So you can take a look at your score and see how you measure up. There's a similar trait in the psychology world called conscientiousness. It's a big 5 personality trait which includes self-discipline and control. Grit adds onto this by factoring in keeping the same long-term goals over time. Dr. Duckworth says one of the most important things about grit is that effort counts twice. Talent times effort equals skill, but skill times effort equals achievement. Remember that grit is a combination of passion and perseverance. Most people tend to be better at working hard than maintaining a long-term consistent focus. So most people score higher in perseverance than passion. What are some examples of this in your own life or maybe with members that you're working with? Yeah, they might say things like, I'm bored, it's not worth it, this isn't important to me, or I can't. And we'll dive into how to problem solve this later. It's great that talent and IQ aren't the only factors to determine success, but what if we or our members aren't that gritty? It's okay. Luckily, we can grow our grit. Let's watch a video on some of the strategies we can use. In order to grow our grit, we're going to foster good goal setting, and then we're going to focus on interest, practice, purpose, and hope or growth mindset. And these last four tend to develop in this particular order. So, our interest, we're going to intrinsically enjoy what we're doing. Practicing, we're going to try to do things better than we did before. Purpose, meaning a conviction that what we're doing matters. And then lastly, hope. This is not the last stage of grit, but it's every stage of grit. We learn to keep going even when things go wrong and even when we have doubts. The first way to grow our grit is to set good goals. Dr. Duckworth describes three types of goals: low level goals, mid level goals, and high level goals or ultimate goals. Our ultimate goal is our vision for our life. All of our lower level goals should drive our higher level goals and relate to one another in some way. By making sure our goals and our energy and talents and efforts are aligned, we can reduce the need for willpower to do these goals because we can execute them without internal friction. But sometimes it's hard to meet the goals we set. Here are two common reasons it can be tough to meet our highest level goals. The first is no low level goals. This is called positive fantasizing. For example, my husband wants to own his own company. He always talks about how he wants to own his own company and how he can hire whoever he wants. He's a huge Pitt fan and he does not like Penn State grads, so his dream is to be able to own his own company, be his own boss, and intentionally not hire anybody who went to Penn State or is a Penn State fan. However, he doesn't have any low level goals to get there, so this is a really good example of positive fantasizing. Maybe somebody talks about wanting to run a marathon, but doesn't set any of those mid level or low level goals to get there. The second is lots of mid level goals with no top goal. With this problem, we may feel pulled in too many directions and some goals may conflict. So, when we have lots of mid level goals and no top level goals, it's really important to dig down into what's important to us to find that ultimate goal, that vision for our life. The second way to grow our grit is to find something that interests us. There are a couple things that are important about this phase. We must step out of our comfort zone and we have to keep doing it. Interests are not discovered by sitting at home thinking about what we want to do, but they're triggered through repeated interactions with the outside world, aka trying new things and trying lots of things. Finding interests is a phase of discovery, and just because we like it doesn't mean it's going to come easy. So, what are some questions that we could ask ourselves or ask our members to help foster their interests? Yeah, we might ask questions like, what do you like? Where does your mind wander? What matters most to you? How do you enjoy spending your time? What do you dislike? Knowing what we dislike is just as important in the process of finding our interests as trying things that we like are. The third way to grow our grit is to practice. But it's okay if we don't like practicing. It's even normal to dislike it. An All American Olympic swimmer, Rowdy Gaines, once said, "I hated practice, but I had an overall passion for the end result, swimming and competing." So, the main things we need to know about practice are that it's about quality, not quantity. So, we need to focus on deliberate practice and make practice a habit. My swimming coach in high school once said that perfect practice makes perfect. So during practice, our challenge should exceed our skill. We want to set stretch goals for ourselves, and then when we meet those goals, set new goals so we keep improving. We also want to make sure to get feedback and reflect on our progress. By practicing deliberately, it will lead to a state called flow, which is habitual behavior without effort, which, as health coaches, this is really where we want all of our members to get a state of flow, where these healthy lifestyle changes become habit. A lot of times as adults, we're afraid of failure. We've been programmed to think that failing is bad, but we can't learn if we don't fail. One example of this is looking at babies and toddlers learning how to do something new, whether it's walking, feeding themselves. They have lots of concentration, but around kindergarten, kids start learning that mistakes cause adults to frown, point out the mistakes, look a little embarrassed, maybe look a little bit shameful. So, around that age, we start getting conditioned that failing is bad, that practicing is bad. But we need to get out of this mindset and remember that every time we try something new and we fail, we're learning a different way to do it. We're learning something that maybe doesn't work and we need to adjust our methods. To grow our grit, it's also important that we have purpose or a way to connect our goals with other people. We need to know that what we do matters to people other than ourselves. So, what are some questions that we can ask ourselves or ask our members to raise their awareness of purpose? Yeah, good. So, we can relate it back to that vision, asking how this overall goal aligns with their values. We can also definitely point out role models for them to look up to and learn from. Lastly, to grow our grit, we have to have a growth mindset. In 1965, two psychologists conducted a study and split dogs into two groups. Both groups of dogs were locked in cages and shocked at random times. One group of dogs had a panel on the front of the cage, and if they pushed against the panel, the shock would end. In the other group, there was no panel that would stop the shock. 64 shocks were administered. On day 2, both groups of dogs were put into boxes with a divider leading to another box. The shock was preceded by a warning tone so that the dog had a chance to react. Nearly all the dogs who had control over the shocks on day 1 learned to jump over the wall and escape. 2/3 of the dogs that did not have the ability to stop the shocks on day 1 simply lay down and waited for the shocks to end. This is an example of learned helplessness. What do you think that means? Yeah, so learned helplessness is a pessimistic outlook and usually explains things through permanent and broad causes. On the other side, learned optimism explains barriers with temporary and specific causes. So, for example, consider a member comes into your health coaching session defeated and says, I didn't log my calories for the week. Probing into this further, people who have learned helplessness are more likely to say something like, I screw up everything, I'm a loser, I can't do it. This attitude will pervade nearly everything they do. In contrast, people who have learned optimism are more likely to say things like, I mismanaged my time, I need to learn a new strategy. Having this mindset leads to specific, actionable things to address next time. If we stop looking for ways to solve our problems, we have zero chance of solving them. A similar concept to these is the growth mindset, that intelligence can be trained and isn't something that we're born with. A growth mindset increases our grit and our perseverance. So if we hit an obstacle, we don't attribute it to something that's permanent or something that is a personal trait. Instead, we believe that we have the capacity to improve no matter what. In contrast, a fixed mindset, we think that we failed at something because we simply don't have it in us and will never have it, so why bother trying? I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about how research on grit directly applies to our field. While a lot of research has been done on grit and how it relates to academics, careers, or children, less research has been done on how grit is associated to healthy behaviors and lifestyle change. One 2013 study by Reed, Pritchett, and Cutton had participants complete an online survey on exercise. Participants then completed the grit scale, a conscientiousness inventory, and a trait descriptive adjectives inventory. Exercise frequency in participants was associated with different trans-theoretical model stages of change using statistics. Several important outcomes were found in this study. Firstly, grit and conscientiousness were positively correlated with higher stages of change. Grit predicted high and moderate stages, while conscientiousness displayed little predictive capability. Grit outperformed conscientiousness in predicting the stage of change. These results support the hypothesis of positive associations between grit, conscientiousness, and stage of change. However, the lack of association for low intensity exercise hints that these constructs are not crucial for the initiation of a program, but they may be important for higher stages of change, such as action and maintenance. So, this is really important when we think about our members. Our whole goal is to get them from that pre contemplative stage into action or into maintenance. So, clearly, from this study, grit matters. The more grit a person has, the higher stage of change they could be in. So, in summary, I want you to remember that talent and IQ are not the only factors that matter for success. Passion and perseverance matter too, and we call this grit. Lucky for us, grit is not fixed, and we can grow our grit through several simple techniques. This really matters to our field and as health coaches because higher grit is associated with behavior change and may be predictive of outcomes or the likelihood of being successful at making behavior changes. So, the last thing that we're going to do to wrap up this training is think about the piece of information you found interesting or helpful and how you're going to incorporate it into your own life or into your health coaching practice. So, in front of you, you'll find a blank sheet of paper, and I'm going to give everybody 1 minute just to write down their thoughts. So, you can get ready. 3, 2, 1, you can start writing. Thank you so much for attending this training, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at the email listed. I would love to hear your thoughts on this training. So what I have here is a QR code. This is going to scan to a satisfaction survey. So if everybody can just pull out their phones and go to your camera. And if you go to your camera and you let your camera focus on the code up at the top, it will tell you to open forms.office.com link. And once you click on that, you'll be linked directly to a satisfaction survey. And again, all comments and feedback are welcome, and this is 100% anonymous.